so we have a freaking tournament. And disturbing, uncomfortable, and it didn't make me feel very good. While it was effective and was very emotionally traumatic, it was too much for me, man. How's it going, guys? Welcome back to Fraud on the Telly. In today's video, we're breaking down the first episode, the season premiere of House of the Dragon, Game of Thrones prequel, an episode in which the seeds were kind of set for the Dance of the Dragons. Rhaenyra gets named heir, and we had that Viserys scene. As always, if you enjoyed the video and learned something new, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe, as it really does help me out and help me grow the channel. Let's get right into it, shall we? Before we get started, just want to make this clear. In this video and in this series, we will be covering spoilers from Fire and Blood because it's way more fun to talk about the story in the broader context and how it's going to set up the story of Dance of the Dragons, which we know because if you didn't know, House of the Dragons was adapted from the book Fire and Blood. Now, there's probably going to be a lot of changes that were made to Fire and Blood, but so far from episode 1, they're keeping on the story. I'll be doing my best not to cover every spoiler explicitly in detail, but if you're trying to avoid spoilers completely, why are you even here? So our episode starts with this cool shot of the sky, and we get our dragon riding scene with our introduction to Rhaenyra. Now, I saw this coming from a mile away. As soon as we see the open sky shot, this just screamed, okay, dragon rider, right? Because they're trying to set the scenes for the Gilded Age of the Targaryens, back when there was an ass ton of dragons, and Targaryens still rode their dragons. The next introductory scene kind of gives us a voiceover telling us the details, giving us the background information for the Gilded Age of the Targaryens. If you watched our Everything You Need to Know Before House of the Dragons video, you would have known all of this and be fully prepared, but we're going to go over it real quick. This time is known as the Gilded Age of the Targaryens, as it was a time of great peace and prosperity for much of Westeros. The King Jaehaerys, having no heir, held a grand council to determine who would succeed him, ultimately choosing King Viserys I, passing over on the opportunity to choose his brother, Daemon, or the older woman, Rhaenys Targaryen, the youngest sister of the conqueror King Aegon. Very important character here. Make sure you take note of her. Our episode begins kind of midway through King Viserys' reign. In broad strokes, our story is one of succession in power, as this will be the driving force for the Dance of the Dragons, the ultimate Targaryen civil war, basically. Already in the first, 30 minutes of episode 1, they lay out a bunch of the characteristics and dynamics of our important characters. So we already mentioned King Viserys. He has a daughter by his first wife, Aemma, named Rhaenyra. However, Viserys is not content with his daughter becoming his heir. He is constantly pushing for a son. In fact, his wife Aemma is currently pregnant in the first episode, which he believes will result in a baby boy and an heir for him. His current heir at the moment is his aforementioned brother, edgy boy and badass Daemon Targaryen. Daemon is vastly different from his brother, besides the guy being a total edgy badass and maybe not the nicest guy around, even though I will say it feels like the show, at least in this first episode, are painting him out to be more of a villain than I believe he really is in the story, but we'll get to that later. We get introduced to some more important characters early on in Rhaenyra's friend, Alicent Hightower. Now, this character in their family is extremely important. Alicent's father, Otto Hightower, is the hand of the king, a very ambitious and a loyal man to the Targaryens, but he has a strong dislike and a strong butting of heads with Daemon Targaryen, Viserys' little brother, who is currently in charge of the Gold Cloaks, basically the police of the Red Keep. As well, we're introduced to Corellis Valyrian, another member of the Small Council. He is the head of House Valyrian, very important family, and husband to the aforementioned Rhaenys Targaryen, very important figure here. King Viserys is wanting to host a tournament for the birth of his son and the crowning of his heir. A little ambitious of him, as at this time there's basically no way to know if his child will be a boy, but the king does what the king wants, so we have a freaking tournament. So they have this tournament there. Daemon Targaryen, who is the ultimate badass warrior, looks to prove themselves by basically trying to defeat and beat the shit out of everybody. He starts off by choosing his opponent, choosing Otto Hightower's oldest son. Obviously, these two don't like each other. Otto does not want Daemon to become heir or any chance of becoming king of the Iron Throne, as he believes Daemon, like Maegor before, will lead them into ruin. He is too unstable. Now, this is a very important dynamic to hone in on. The show does a good job of really kind of bringing it to the forefront of your mind, but later on in the series, it's going to explode into something even more. As well, in the tournament, there is a surprise knight who seems to be unseating a lot of people, a knight by the name of Kristen Cole. Now, this knight is extremely important later on in the series, as they and Rhaenyra will become extremely close with one another, eventually Kristen Cole becoming the head of the Kingsguard. Randomly in this tournament, things go extremely violent for no reason. We got people just murdering each other in the tournament. When in the last time in the tournament were noble knights and lords allowed to just kill each other for sport? I don't remember this at all. It's HBO though, so you know you gotta get your sex and violent licks in whenever it is. I guess some things never change, but it seemed so unnecessary and it just felt so shoehorned in because, you know, HBO, Game of Thrones, wasn't really a fan of it if I'm gonna be honest. During the tournament, King Viserys goes to check on his wife who has gone into labor mid-tournament. Yeah, what an awesome husband, you know, deciding to get up off his ass and watching the tournament to go support his wife who's giving birth. However, if you're familiar with the story of Fire and Blood, you knew that this was not going to go well. There's complications going on with the pregnancy. A maester presents Viserys with a horrible option. One, potentially risk both losing his wife and his potential unborn child, who they do determine is a male apparently. Or two, save the child by sacrificing the mother, aka old school C-section, which we still do nowadays, but obviously we can save the freaking mother. This was brutal, man. It was brutal. It was emotional. It made me extremely uncomfortable. I don't know how to feel about it. I was genuinely shocked when they actually showed this on screen. A little overboard for me. I'm not gonna lie. Was not a fan of it. Everything up until the point of when they're actually showing this going down, I think was enough. I don't think they had to push that extra boundary just for the shock value. Maybe that's just me. Maybe I'm a now. I have no idea. All I know was, that was disturbing, uncomfortable, and it didn't make me feel very good. Unfortunately, Viserys is going to be feeling even worse because he makes the choice to sacrifice his wife to save his son, and unfortunately, his son dies too. Viserys now is left in an impossible predicament. He has no heir besides Rhaenyra, his daughter, who is extremely competent and capable, but you know, it do be Game of Thrones, so no women rulers allowed. Oh yeah, I should have mentioned this earlier, but when Rhaenys was looked over for the role as queen by the council, basically dubbing her the queen who never was, this really established the precedent for the male bloodline becoming the ruler in Westeros. We know George R. R. Martin's a big feminist. The guy's big feminist, and basically Game of Thrones is a whole critique on this power structure. If you didn't know, go check out a guy named Preston Jacobs' channel, because he could do a way better job of explaining it than I could. Make matters worse, Daemon Viserys' brother is making some bad choices. The guy having feel like he's been rejected as Viserys' heir, rejected by his brother, rejected by people at court, basically celebrates in a way this child's death, declaring him an heir for a day. This pisses Viserys off, who banishes our boy Daemon back to the Vale where his wife lives. We had a cool dragon scene here. Daemon flying off on his dragon Caraxes, known as the Blood Worm, because it's all red and super scary. This dragon is one of the most deadly and aggressive dragons of the lot that the Targaryens currently have. Daemon's words are basically the straw that breaks the camel's back, as Viserys has been told by his council, specifically Otto Hightower, that he should make his daughter heir. Now we know that Otto here is an ambitious man. While he may be looking out for the best for the throne, he's also looking out for his family's own interest. That's why he sends his daughter Alicent Hightower to go comfort the king. Now, if you haven't figured it out, Hightower's plan is this. Basically, get his daughter Alicent, who's friends with Rhaenyra, by the way, to woo the king, basically to seduce him. Spoiler alert, but ultimately this is going to be the case, and Viserys will marry Alicent Hightower at some point in the future, creating a big rift between Alicent and Rhaenyra as friends, because now it looks like, basically a fight again for succession. Who will become Viserys' heir once Alicent marries him and starts to have his children? It starts to make things a little more complicated. As well, in a scene earlier, the small council mentioned some pirates basically raiding a set of islands known as the Stepstones. We know from Fire and Blood that Daemon, after his banishment, does not go to the Vale. Instead, he decides to go to the Stepstones, conquering them, basically naming himself king, and eventually coming back to King's Landing, apologizing to his brother, and then they make up for a very short while. So that's most likely where we will see Daemon next, heading off to the Stepstones. As well, towards the end of the episode, when Viserys tells his daughter that he is going to name her his heir, we get a very interesting tie-in to Game of Thrones and A Song of Ice and Fire. I don't know how I feel about this, but Viserys begins telling his daughter of a prophecy known as the Song in Ice and Fire, basically the events that play out in the Game of Thrones, this frigid doom that will come down from the north, which we already know about if you've watched a Game of Thrones. And his words is the prophecy passed down from Aegon to the Targaryens, because only a Targaryen, according to them, can sit the Iron Throne and stop this supposed frigid doom. Now, prophecies in Game of Thrones is super weird. In the books, they're basically never right. In my opinion, they're more there to obfuscate in the books, but the show is like taking them a little more literally. As well, we see that Viserys is wielding a very interesting blade in this scene, the Catspaw Dagger, aka the Dragonbone Dagger, the Valyrian steel blade, the one that showed up at the beginning of Game of Thrones, the one that Cat stopped the assassin from killing Bran with, kind of setting a Game of Thrones into motion. I don't know how to feel about this dagger resurging. I feel like this was kind of a dropped plot point in the first series of Game of Thrones. So maybe the writers here are trying to do something with it. Stuff like this always makes me super wary when they try to go all supernatural and prophecy based. I hope it's not going to be as simple as that. I hope there's going to be some twists and turns here if they're going to go this route. If you've read Fire and Blood, or at the very least know the story of the Dance of the Dragons and how everything happens, there was so many teasers for the eventual basically civil war that's going to take place between this family and the different factions of this family all throughout the show. There was the whole scene between Daemon and Rhaenyra in the throne room. That was screaming foreshadowing. Spoilers right here. If you don't know, eventually these two get together. Yep, that's right. We got a little Targaryen incest. You already know it. You already know it. Obviously, there's the things with Alicent and the scheming of the Hightowers. There is the Valyrians and Rhaenyra. So much stuff going on here. You can already see the factions slowly starting to form. If you pay a little more attention and you know some of this background information, it's much easier to see it happening in front of us. Finally, one more thing I just wanted to touch on. This sword here, I'm pretty sure, is the sword Blackfyre that Viserys is wielding. We don't know for sure, but we know that Viserys does wield the sword Blackfyre, as it is the Targaryen sword that at this point basically represents whoever is the king of Targaryens. Usually they wield this sword. Later on in the future of a Game of Thrones and Dance with the Dragons, this sword will become very, very important. My Game of Thrones nerds know this, so keep your eye on this sword. I believe that's what this sword is. I don't know why they would have him wield another sword that wasn't Blackfyre, so kind of cool to see it on screen for, I believe, the first time. And yeah, that was my breakdown for everything that happened in episode 1 of House of the Dragon. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. I'm not gonna lie, that C-section scene, while it was effective and was very emotionally traumatic, it was too much for me, man. Overall, I'm decently happy with episode 1 of House of the Dragon. Trying not to get too hype about this show, as it could fall off at any minute. You just have no idea with Game of Thrones. But overall, I think they did a really good job of sticking with the material that they had and setting up the eventual big grand story arcs that we're gonna see play out. As always, if you enjoyed the video or learned something new, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. As always, I hope to see you guys in the next video. Stay safe out there. Peace, love, adieu.